As part of measures or efforts to reform the ports in the country, a whole lot of decisions have been taken in the past and are still being taken, and perhaps will also be taken. Well, one of such is this single window platform, which they say will aid clearance of goods at the ports and a whole lot more. Well, that and perhaps a lot more matters we'll focus on in this segment. And we're joined by Valentina Mintah, who is a modernization consultant with the Nigeria Customs Service. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you.
Well, first and foremost, let's get a background of this for those who may not exactly understand it. What is this single window system about?
I think when we first mention single window, the first vision or image we should have in mind is the importer, the exporter, and the transit principle. So when we think about single window, we should be thinking about creating an environment, an enabling environment for the importer and exporter to do business and be competitive on the international market. Therefore, single window in summary is providing an integrated workspace for the trader, who is the importer and exporter, to access all the procedures and processes and workflows and data elements, all the documents, etc., that are required to comply with importing and exporting regulations, to make it accessible for the trader to be able to conduct their business through the single window environment, making it an effective and simple and fast way to do business.
Do you think that's the reason? Because we just saw before they came to us now, we saw the customs official complain about, containers that have been abandoned in the ports for quite a while. Is that one of the reasons why it's difficult for people to be able to clear their goods, or is it just plain laziness?
Well, when you think about international trade, once again, looking at it from the perspective of the importer or exporter, all they are interested in is buying and selling, shipping it, and getting paid. Now, below that, you'll have all the regulatory procedures and all the stakeholders that will enable that happen, from the ports, from the banks who provide the financial operations, down to the customs and regulatory agencies who will enable this trader obtain the necessary permits and regulatory documents. So there's quite a number of activities that go on beyond that buy, ship, pay model. And all this must fit into an overall trade facilitation environment, which is enabling this importer or exporter comply with the necessary regulations and move the goods along. For example, once the trader has complied with all these elements, the physical goods must move along a road. Are there roadblocks on those roads? Are there bottlenecks on those? So it has to fit an overall trade facilitation agenda. Therefore, it's difficult to say one particular area is lazy or inefficient. We have to look at it very holistically, see where the bottlenecks are, and provide the single window environment for our importers and exporters.
Well, if I should come in here now, because in all of this we try to break it down so that the man who does business or in and around the ports should understand how this actually operates. Remember the last time the coordinating minister for the economy did ask loads and loads of people and ministries, departments, parastatals to vacate the ports just to facilitate business. Now that is doing business with ease in and around our ports. How can this help the individual who's going to bring in goods into the country, or who's going to take goods through the ports outside the country, or an agency or a department? Now, because the key word here is to facilitate now, which is making things easy, and everyone wants to see that is done. How can that help us?
I think what has to be looked at are the processes. So for the trader to comply, they have to go through some regulations and processes. Processes and procedures start right from the transaction level when the buyer or seller secures a contract. So the ports might be one angle, but the transaction starts way before, where documentary evidence and additional documents must be applied for and permits sought, going right through the international trade supply chain, going through the financial elements, the commercial elements, getting to the ports. Now, all these officials or all these stakeholders must assist or must comply with their mandates of their agencies. So processes and procedures must be handled. However, the issue here is looking at the duplications in the systems. Look, and ensuring that these processes are
that
understood.
has always been the problem, duplication in the system. That is what people just want to see, because by the time you get, for instance, sorry to butt in there, for instance, you get to point A, you just realize that what you've just done with point B or point A1 is almost the same as point B.
Absolutely. So. And that's where the issue is. And that's what single window is about. It's looking at the overall environment of the international trade supply chain, getting a grasp of what procedures or processes are going on, looking at those procedures, harmonizing those by simplifying those and making those effective. So yes, the man at the port from agency Y has to do the job. The man behind the desk who's approving the permits has to do his job, or her, and the woman equally. The banks have to take payments for that particular transaction. But we all have to sit down and say, okay, we're all here to enable this importer or exporter move the goods, not to create a convoluted environment for this trader. We're not here to frustrate. Therefore, let's all sit back. Why do we need to do what we're doing? Let's look at it and integrate and create a workflow behind the scenes so that the importer or exporter can just focus on their work of importing and exporting.
Okay, in this single window, because I mean, I know that it's also been advocated by the United Nations now, what would you suggest? Would you suggest a single authority manning the single window, or would you suggest, say, a group of, should it be a conglomeration of parastatals, ministries and agencies that need to be doing that job all in one single place to, enable, to facilitate ease of doing business, as it were?
That can only be answered by conducting a feasibility study and looking at your environment. There are no two single window environments on this planet that are identical. The key is looking at the challenges of the country, the priorities of the country, and how feasible it is to put those particular models in place. So, for example, before you go on and embark on that journey, I mean, there's so many initiatives going on and so many projects going on to help the importer and exporter. So an alignment of that has to happen. But the most important thing is do a gap analysis, have a feasibility study, decide what your target model is. Are you going to go for a centralized approach or a decentralized approach? Are you going to look at re-engineering your processes, or are you going to look at the status quo but just making it more effective? Are you going to go for automation or true paperless?
Isn't this going to be automated?
Automation, ICT is an enabler and not a driver. And therefore you can look at you can achieve a lot by looking at your manual processes and making those effective, by removing the replications and the duplications in the system, by harmonizing your data sets, by harmonizing your documents, by harmonizing your processes. Now, when you've done that, you can then look at ICT to automate those. Because if you jump to automation without understanding what your issues are, it's a very well-known fact that if you throw technology at a problem without knowing what your problem is, you'll just be making the same mistakes faster and in a very costly way.
And we're very sure, sorry, Mark, but we're very sure in that case the government and the agencies in charge should have done some kind of feasibility study.
A feasibility study is definitely required, but once again, as I mentioned, there's so many good initiatives that are going on the ground. But the key is, single window is not about one agency or one worldview of one particular stakeholder group. Therefore, collaboration is key, and looking at all these initiatives and having a lead agency and the political will to bring all these things together so that there's a focused approach. So there might be IT systems being implemented in the banks, for instance, in the ports, in customs, who has a good ICT modernization program ongoing. And it's looking at what is available. And for that target model, are you going to go for integrated systems? I mean, in the more mature economies, for instance, they have very good enterprise solutions existing in these stakeholder groups. Therefore, there is no point in throwing those out and putting in a single window system. Rather, you would go for a messaging or interfacing or integrating approach where you have systems integrating. But with emerging economies where we're lucky to have a greenfield, it's excellent to step back, look at what our needs are, what are the priorities, what are the challenges, what are the capacity building needs, what are the change management. Single window is all about change, changing the way we do business.
Are we looking at or studying any developing economy that has some peculiarities as ours, as a model or something of sort? Because, I mean, you say no single plan can be implemented in the same way in another country.
I think for an exercise like this, one must look at benchmarking against international standards or but in doing that benchmark, you must look at a profile of countries that are similar to yours with similar challenges. Once again, you wouldn't have identical situations. But if we look at West Africa, you have Ghana, you have Senegal. If you look at Africa as a whole, you have Mauritius, who are doing very well with their international trade environment. And I always refer back to the World Bank doing business, ease of doing business rankings, with the trading across borders being a very good indication of how a country is doing in their international trade environment, because the rankings looks at the number of documents an importer or exporter is required to fill in to move the goods from country A to B. It also looks at the costs of importing or exporting, and it looks at the time it takes to actually move the goods from A to B. And if you look at those countries that I mentioned earlier, you have Senegal, who is currently ranked at number 65. You have Ghana ranked at number 90. And then you have Nigeria currently ranked at 149 out of 183 countries.
In that case, we should be talking about some kind of appreciable gains in productivity and effectiveness so that we can leave that position. So how can we go about all of that?
I think the key is collaboration. Collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
With who?
With the stakeholders within the international trade supply chain. And having this as a national agenda and having the mandate, a political will to actually do something about the environment. But most importantly, looking at the importer or exporter as the key beneficiary of the system. Because we all know that the importers and exporters are the drivers to economic growth. And in improving the environment, you hit the man on the streets, you hit the kid on the streets. You also look at entrepreneurship. You might have the children of today thinking about being importers and exporters and thinking, okay, my country, Nigeria, provides me with the right environment for me to compete on the international market, and therefore I'm going to aspire to do that when I grow up. Equally, us as consumers, if we're able to create the single window environment with the trader or the importer-exporter at the core, we know that our goods will get to us quicker and cheaper. Okay. Because you don't have the markups that they have to put on because of the inefficiencies of the system.
You know,
right. Sorry, this is going to be across all the ports in the country, is it? Not just in one or two?
It's not about just the ports. It's about the regulatory agencies in the administrative areas. It's about the borders. And it's not... The key is ensuring that the experience of the trader is consistent wherever they are. And ultimately, this importer or exporter should be able to access the single window environment 24/7 to be able to go through their regulatory requirements, putting the application. You don't have to wait physically for...
Can I do it from my house?
A single
At the end of the day?
Single window, of course. You can do it from your smartphone. You can do it from the back of your car. Now, if we've understood what your needs are as an importer and exporter, and we've got a grasp of the processes you've gone through, we live in a technology world. We can find a technology solution that would come to you. We take I use the analogy or the example of the ticketing. A few years ago, to travel from A to B, you had to go physically into a ticket agent's office and spend days just trying to get a route because they didn't have internet access to get you the best route, etc. And then you'd have that carbon copy ticket stubs, the red carbon copy ticket, and you'd hold on to that for dear life until you got into your seat. Now you can go online 11 p.m. and think, I want to move from Azerbaijan to Zimbabwe within 2 weeks. You can go online, search for that, put in all your information, and buy your ticket online with a unique reference number which is allocated to you. You can even go through your pre-arrival information, such as in the US where you have the ESTA, and put it all the information that you require. And all you need to do is at the airport show your iPhone or your smartphone, unique reference number, get your boarding pass, and you're on. And I think if we all think like that and how possible this is, same with the banking industry. Now we don't have to physically go in and queue up to get our own cash from the bank. You can access your cash wherever you are in this world when you have an ATM.
No,
So definitely, regardless of whether or not, technology does have, excuse me, a role to play in all of this. Whether or not we're looking at technology.
Technology has a key role to play in it, but we don't make it the driver. Technology is the enabler. We need to understand the problem we're trying to solve. We need to understand the people who are in there, the capacity building aspect, the change management aspect. We need to understand the processes that we're looking at automating. And we need to look at the policy to ensure that the legal framework enables what we're talking about. So I always focus on the 4 Ps of the people, the processes, the platform, and the policy. And you must make sure you have a full grasp of all these to ensure that whatever technology you buy, when you switch it on, it does actually work effectively.
So at the end of the day, there may be policy formulation or adjustments to accommodate this?
There will be.
Okay.
But asked earlier, whom you thought should manage, and you said, we have to conduct a feasibility study. But haven't been in Nigeria for a while and, maybe understanding some of the challenges that they usually would have. Who would you recommend mans the single window?
That's a very good question. And as I keep saying, there are lots of good initiatives happening in various areas. Customs plays a very key role in international trade. Customs integrates with quite a number of the stakeholders that we talk about in international trade. Now, if you have an agency that has the will and that has the political backing and that has the resources and has the clout to actually manage a program of this nature, then that agency should be the lead agency. It might be a combination of 2 strong lead agencies who come together to work. It might be a lead agency who has more connections with a number of stakeholders or has already matured in the maturity stakes in terms of ICT modernization and understanding of international trade.
So you would recommend the Nigeria Customs Service, but looking at the customs service as it is presently, what would you say would pose the biggest challenge for them in trying to implement the single window?
The biggest challenge would be stakeholders engaging and stakeholders truly coming together to create this environment.
Who would the stakeholders be?
The stakeholders would range from public sector right down to private sector. So stakeholders will be the regulatory agencies, the ports, community companies, the banks, all those entities within the stakeholder groups who enable the importer or exporter move their goods. And therefore, those would have to come together. But most importantly, there has to be political will right at the top so that customs, even though customs might be driving the change, or customs with another agency is helping to drive this, that has to be overall leadership right from the top to ensure that customs are given a mandate but are regulated, and someone gives the terms and references of which they should act, if it is customs that's selected to do that.
What about this? Because they had the automated system of customs data. They also had Nigeria Integrated Customs Management System. That's the NICIS project. Are they going to phase this one out, or how will this affect the whole strategy?
When we talk about single window, I think we really must look at the processes that affect the traders. So when you go into customs in any country, customs would have their own IT systems, some of which you've mentioned. When you go into the banks will have their own systems, some of which benefit the importer or exporter. If you go into the regulatory agencies, they might have their own enterprise IT systems that the importer or exporter access. But to look at the single window environment, it's looking at the cross-section of systems and processes that are relative to the importer or exporter. So you might have excellent systems in the banks, excellent systems in customs, excellent systems in other regulatory agencies, but they might not be relevant to the importer or exporter. So once again, stepping back and looking at what are the needs of the importer and exporter. Are the systems in place fit for purpose? If they're not fit for purpose, what are the gaps? How do we then plug those to address the needs of the importer or exporter?
Okay.
And a lot of good work has been done in customs and other agencies and other stakeholder groups that are working to supporting our importers and exporters. But we need to build on that to build the optimum system.
Are they looking to make this happen likely this year?
The initiative has certainly started, sensitizing the users of the system. And the users of the system includes the customs officials, the officials who sit in the other agencies, both public and private sector, who need to understand why this is needed, to change their mindset, and to have programs in place. And next week, on the 23rd of April, on Monday, at the Customs Staff and Command College in Gwagwalada, there's a national stakeholder conference happening, which is bringing all stakeholders to the table, having UN representatives, WCO representatives, and the like, to initiate the dialogue. And that would be followed by a 3-day workshop for practitioners and the operational staff to understand business process analysis, change management, and stakeholder engagement. So the initiative has started now to build the capacity.